all? Dr. Raphael X here with another video with my special guest, Matthew Bunson, who wrote a very interesting book. I think the first one on a biography, a portrait of the first American Pope, Leo the 14th. But before anything else, let us begin with the sign of the cross, as always, remembering our baptism. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Man.
All right, please subscribe, click on the like button, notifications button, all that good stuff. So, thank you, Matthew, for coming on. We appreciate it. Now
Oh,
you're
great to be with you.
and thanks. And first question, of course, is because the Pope, Pope Francis, Pope Leo has not been Pope for 2 months, and this book has been out already for some time,
It
actually.
has. Yeah.
It's been out for a month, right?
Yes. So technically,
So the
he was
golden question,
elected
how'd
on.
you write it? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so technically, he was elected. Not technically, he was elected on May 8th.
Right.
We had a book launch in Rome the night that we actually went to press that book on May 22nd. And before anyone asked, no, AI was not involved with this. But I've had the great privilege of doing a similar books in 2005 for Benedict XVI and then Pope Francis in 2013. So let's just say that technology was very different back then, but we still managed to get it out in a hurry. So it requires just, I think, a couple of things. Having done these types of books before, a good understanding of what's involved, and the most important part, to be honest, is having a very clear understanding of what you're trying to accomplish with a book like this.
Right.
There's this temptation that as you are starting to work on it, that you start galloping down roads of, well, I want this to be a 500, 600 page biography of the new Pope. That's simply not going to happen. It's all summed up really in the very word that we chose, and that is a portrait of our new Holy Father.
Yeah.
So we're very clear that this is going to cover his life, major influences on that life, including in particular the Augustinian tradition, and then answering two major questions. The first is, what was it about him that compelled the vast majority of the members of the College of Cardinals to elect him Pope? And then, based on what we have seen in these early days, where do we think he's going to lead the church? And I think with that very clear set of parameters, it is possible to do a book like this, but it just requires a lot of work. As my wife said, she has talked about this publicly, that she was able to come over for the last days of the conclave and then the first days of Pope Leo. She joked that she would fall asleep with me typing and then she would wake up with me typing. So it's essentially it's an immense amount of work, but all thanks also goes to EWTN Publishing and Sophia for the immense help that they gave in a variety of different ways.
So regardless of whoever would have been elected, you would have came out with a book. So it's not like you knew it. Is it that you
No,
knew of him a special way, or is
no. Well, I mean, I think as with any papal election, you have some idea of the favorites. Obviously, 2013 was a bit of a surprise. Cardinal Bergoglio had been the runner-up in 2005, and then the conventional wisdom is that he sort of came out of nowhere in 2013. But he was certainly somebody that I was long aware of as one of the leading cardinals of South America. So you have that as a starting point.
right?
In the case of Cardinal Prevost, I will say that he landed on my radar significantly starting in 2023 when Pope Francis plucked him out of seeming obscurity in this diocese in Chiclayo in Peru and made him head of one of the biggest offices in the Vatican, the office that helps the Pope pick bishops around. Made him a cardinal very early. He's an American. But when I arrived on the morning of April 22nd, so the day after Pope Francis died, his name began circulating and it just continued to sort of percolate. And I will confess, and I have several witnesses in case anyone doubts this, I had his biography on my phone, for example, and I was really looking into him
Wow.
very closely in the days leading up to the conclave. Now, there were other major candidates. I think of Cardinal Pietro Parolin, and I think of Cardinal Matteo Zuppi, even Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa, the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem. But there was something that kept drawing me back to Cardinal Robert Prevost. And it turns out, of course, that it just wasn't me. I was simply picking up some of the sense, what was there in the ether already.
Right, right. Yeah, and even the title, the first American Pope, which you mentioned, it might seem controversial for those like in Latin America, where America
Right.
is actually America. They don't distinguish. They don't have. They talk about five continents. When I learned in Spanish, it was five continents, like five continents. They don't count at Antarctica, and America is America. So, in a
Right.
general sense, and you make that distinction there. First American for those who typically associate America with the U.S., which is
That's right.
Russ. Um, but also, I like how you make that tie at the beginning with because Pope Leo the 13th has a very he's the one, correct me if I'm wrong, he's the one who condemns Americanism, but he has a very a tremendous kind of he edified type of look on the Americans, and you mentioned that also. So it's kind of like a very paternal relationship with America, and it's interesting if you can expand a little about that. How Pope Leo, essentially the first American, is going to take Leo I'll say follow in that legacy of Leo.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, sort of overhanging this are a couple of really interesting dynamics. The first and thank you for noting it, that Leo the 14th, we call him the first American Pope. And what we mean by that is certainly he's the first US born Pope, but he's also a very transcendent figure. He is somebody who connects the northern North America with South America or North America and Latin America. So he connects all of that into one sort of the Americas. And all credit, of course, goes to Pope Francis and that extraordinary development in the history of the church that he was the first South American, first Latin American pontiff. But Leo is this kind of bridge builder, and he's somebody who connects very well. I mean, the traditional word for pontifex is the builder of bridges, and here he is, pontifex. But then you said something really important too, and that is the very clear connection that Leo the 14th has made with Leo the 13th, the Pope from 1878 to 1903, and he took his name in honor of Leo the 13th. A, because obviously of the great legacy of Leo the 13th and Rerum Novarum in 1891 that gave us this great blueprint, the Magna Carta, as it's been called, for the modern understanding of the Church of Catholic social teaching. But he was also somebody who was very clearly, and again, thank you for picking up on that, very concerned with the life in the United States. We start the book with Longiqua, which was this remarkable but essentially overlooked encyclical by Leo the 13th, talking about the Catholic Church in the United States, in America, and how it has so much promise, and he wants it to continue to develop. Then, of course, we had the great concern that followed with Americanism, this idea of the risk of certain elements in the church of embracing some of the worst or destructive or potentially toxic aspects of philosophy and this idea of this openness to many of the isms that characterize the 19th century and into the 20th century, socialism, modernism, all of those things that really do pose a risk to that vital continuity of the authenticity of the teachings of the church. So there's a lot going on in just the choice of a name. But one of my favorite little details that came out after the conclave was finished, a couple of cardinals made note of the fact that at the time of his election, when he said accepto, when he was asked if he would accept due election by the College of Cardinals, he was asked by what name would he be called, and Cardinal Prevost he thought for a minute about taking the name Augustine, which would make sense given that he's a member of the Augustinian order. But at the end, he chose Leo the 14th, again in that sort of doffing of the cap to Leo the 13th, and we can note too Leo the 1st. But it is said that the cardinals gasped a little when they heard the name, and then there was spontaneous applause. And I think that's sort of a little bit of applause that all of us had when we heard the name Leo the 14th on May 8th when he was announced.
That's right. Yeah. No, there's a lot goes into the name, which you mentioned at the
Yeah,
end of your chapter. But also, I like how you tie in that kind of like this, and Leo the 14th kind of he comes from this area where there's a decline of Catholicism, and it seems like that you imply, and I've heard this before. America really is like in the sense, it's like how America goes. It's like where the church goes in a sense, because America seems to be in the forefront of the culture battle, of the religious battles. You see this definitely when there's like you see a great evil, and then you see protests. Like you see a tremendous culture battle here, religious battle
Right.
here. So there does seem to be a decrease, especially where he was from. If you could talk about that a little bit, because I know, sadly, the church and the seminary that he went to, the church
Right.
he was baptized in, is also closed. Maybe he's kind of called to kind of bring back up that because also Leo the 13th mentioned, which is interesting, how the American spirit is tied to Catholicism somehow. If you want to expand on that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, Leo the 13th was very much aware of the importance of Catholicism in the life of the United States. We were founded, of course, by people who came to North America as a nation, anyway, looking in large part for religious freedom, for a new beginning, having left the old world. But that was especially true with the vast waves of migrants, with the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, the Lithuanians, I mean, you name it. They arrived in vast numbers and faced real challenges culturally, politically, economically, in terms of assimilation and acceptance. And Leo, having had friendships with people like Mother Cabrini and others, understood what it meant to face those challenges, and then to build the American churches they did. I mean, the history of the 19th century in the United States is an extraordinary adventure of growth, but also challenges. I mean, the riots and the anti-Catholic prejudices that were there, but American Catholicism persevered. And early then in the 20th century, when we go to 1926, and it's funny how we keep talking about Chicago. In 1926, in Chicago, we had the International Eucharistic Congress that attracted 1 million people. Now, how they had water and just to say porta potties and other things for 1 million people back then, it's just an extraordinary thought to me. But they pulled it off, and in Soldier Field, and I've described it in lectures and other things as the great coming out party for American Catholicism. All of that was made possible by the work of Catholics leading up to that, and Leo the 13th was very much aware of that. That arc of growth and development and pride continued throughout the 20th century. And you can see in the 1950s, at the time in 1955, when Robert Prevost was born to Louis and Mildred Prevost, he grew up in what some have described as sort of the last era, the last golden age, so to speak, of American Catholicism. Now, I don't necessarily agree with that, because every age is a golden one because we have the Eucharist.
That's right, yeah.
But it was certainly a time of institutional growth and continuing development that then sort of peaked in the early 1960s. And then we see this steady decline. Now, we always have to be very careful. We do not ever blame the Second Vatican Council, for example, for what followed. Rather, the church, the world, the United States in particular, were all hit by the great storms of the late 1960s, 1968 in particular. The sexual, economic, political, media, all of these different revolutions that sort of washed over the country. And you can see then this period of contraction. And that is the arc, that is the sort of context for Robert Prevost's childhood, and then at the time when he entered the church. And I have to say that one of the things that really struck me about his time as a college student and then as a young Augustinian is how he was clearly aware of this great tumult that was happening in the life of the church, but he never lost focus of his vocation to the priesthood of the religious life, and then embarks on this grand adventure as a missionary. So it's this fidelity to the sense of vocation that he's had that you can see that helped him to survive all of this upheaval. And we can credit his family, we can credit the Augustinians, but I think we can also credit the great spiritual and priestly understanding that he had of that vocation to which he was called. And I think that's a somewhat underrated but very important dimension to his life.
Yeah, he seems to radiate security and hope and peace. right?
Yeah.
There's a sense of paternity in him, a deep sense of paternity. I mean, I was definitely moved when he came out. He was moved. I mean, he was definitely emotional.
That's
You could
right.
see it clearly, and yeah, and there's a continuity here too. Interestingly, as you say, 'cause only atheists believe in coincidences, right? As you
Right.
mentioned, coincidences don't exist. We believe in providence. So,
Hmm.
um, he is ordained, or he went into the seminary the same day as the Novus Ordo was promulgated, which can show certain which shows continuity there, kind of this hermeneutic of continuity that Benedict XVI, talked about and promoted.
Well, that's right. Yeah, that hermeneutic of continuity and reform. And it's especially interesting to me, and I'm glad you raised this, Raphael, because when we look at him, you sort of segued a little bit into it. This very clear set of visual continuities that he has,
Mm.
wearing the Mosetta, for example, when he came out, sort of not rejecting Pope Francis by any means, because he certainly sees himself in direct continuity with Francis, but he sees himself also in direct continuity with all of the popes from Peter forward. In particular, though, he sees himself very clearly in continuity with Francis, but also with Benedict, with John Paul II, with Paul VI, and with the Council. And then when we layer into that as well, the fact that he had a very strong reputation as a priest, as a bishop, and as head of the Augustinians, with liturgical precision, he likes and demands good liturgy. And what does that mean? It means that this is the Mass, the Novus Ordo that he essentially grew up with, that he was formed under, but he wants good, solid liturgy in much the same way that we see with Benedict XVI. You know, with Summorum Pontificum, as important as it was under Benedict XVI, Benedict was also very taken up with the importance of reverent, authentic, careful, precise, and faithful liturgy. And you can see the exact same thing with Pope Leo, but also that layer of continuity, the way he is using, for example, the pastoral staff, first carved by Lelo Scarcelli and given to Paul VI, that he used to close the Second Vatican Council. It was then bequeathed, so to speak, to Pope St. John Paul II, that became one of the great symbols of his pontificate. He has used vestments as well from Paul VI, from John Paul II, from Benedict XVI, and Francis. So all of this coming together is that he's very clear, semiotics, the importance of symbols. He understands them visually, but not just as these sort of blunt statements of, well, this is what I want for my vestments. He's also reminding us of the importance of that continuity and the beauty of the Catholic aesthetic.
Right, right. Everything you've just said reminded me of what his background was or is. Instead of psychology, he actually went for mathematics. He was a math
Yes,
teacher, I believe. So
he was.
really,
Yeah.
this mathematics helps this. Obviously, it ties into loving the symbols, loving the order of the liturgy. Do you see that maybe there's a growing thirst, especially among the young people who want to kind of focus on this mathematical type of clarity, this doctrinal and liturgical clarity that some people have said was kind of maybe not so much focused on. So I don't know if what you think.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think, well, first, as a mathematician, you have to go way back. I think you have to go all the way back to Pope Urban VIII in the 16th or the
That's right.
17th
That's
century
right.
before you find somebody who was that, and that's a whole Galileo thing. So that's a different conversation. But to find a pope who is so mathematically inclined, Leo is somebody who very clearly has this mathematical mind. I've used the word a couple of times, precision. I've joked that certainly as the inheritor of the many challenges of Vatican finances, I think it's good to have a math major in charge. We know he can count, but there's also that dimension too that he is a holder of a doctorate in canon law
That's right.
from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, Angelicum in Rome, with everything that sort of implies and suggests. But he's also not just simply a holder of a doctorate in canon law, JCD. He's actually somebody who has, over these decades, since he completed his dissertation in 1987, used it extensively in a variety of different positions and locations from Peru, helping various dioceses with their tribunal issues and canonical issues, then as a bishop, and then also as the head of the prefect for the Congregation of Bishops, and of course as head of the Augustinians for 12 years or so. So all of that suggests that this is somebody who understands the importance of law, the importance of order. But I think you've also suggested something that is very important that we've been seeing now for a number of years. At EWTN News, we've been tracking this, and that is the growing appeal of Catholicism, Christianity broadly, but Catholicism in particular to young people, the Gen Zs. As I'm sure you've talked about on this show, the number of Gen Zs who have come into the church in the last few years. This last Easter vigil, for example, had an extraordinary number of young people. If you look at the pilgrimage to Chartres in France,
Right.
20,000 people, almost all of them young, in procession in this magnificent sort of medieval looking Eucharistic procession. Young people are looking for something that is bigger than they are, and consistently now they are finding the Catholic Church. So I think we are perfectly positioned with the clarity that Leo brings, the desire for good liturgy that he brings, but also the great continuity that he brings in terms of symbols and images for the life of the church. I think this is a very significant moment, and you're right. There are no coincidences. This is clearly providence.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Very well said. If we could go back to his he sees himself more as he's more not in line, but he's closer to the because he was a bishop in Peru, so
That's
he's
right.
closer to Peru in the sense that the church there than or is the diocese there than he's than American. Okay, he actually spent less time in America, if I'm not mistaken, as a bishop and cardinal. Is that right? So he is closest with Peru. What was his experiences there, and how he kind of, because he kind of grew up, I think, lower middle class. Maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I got that from because I remember reading a lot that he's playing in the streets and things like that. I don't know if south side of Chicago. I don't know if it was lower middle class.
Yeah,
Correct me on that. And
yeah,
yeah,
Dalton. You could say working class or middle class, however you want to describe it.
right.
There's always a temptation to say, well, the suburbs of Chicago, well, Dalton is sort of its own thing. But you're right. I think the one thing that I always said since really getting to know him in terms of research, his how seemingly ordinary his childhood was. How seemingly there's nothing on the surface. It doesn't look extraordinary that this would produce a pope, and yet it did. His parents were devout Catholics, and I think that's very significant. But you also make an important point that he has been gone or was gone for decades. He left essentially the United States, in 1985, after he had been with the Augustinians. He went through formation, was ordained in 1982, and then just 3 years later, what do? They send him to one of the most rugged and demanding missionary territories anywhere in the mountainous parts of Peru. And from that point on, you can see he's had some assignments back here in the United States, but really for the vast majority of the time, he has been away from the United States. And I think that was one of the reasons why a lot of the Cardinals chose him. It didn't matter at the end of the day that he was born in the United States, that he was an American in that traditional sense, in part because he had been gone for so long. But there was something about his temperament, the way that he dealt with people. He just didn't strike people as a classic American in that sense.
Yeah.
But you also make an important distinction, too, that he was there in Peru for many, many years as a missionary. Then he becomes head of the Augustinian order, which meant that he was living in Rome for 12 years with travel all over the globe. Comes back and in short order is sent back to Peru. First as the apostolic administrator in Chiclayo, and then as bishop in Chiclayo in 2014, 2015, becomes a bishop and stays there until 2023 when Pope Francis moves him. So his connections, in fact, with the United States are very distant. Now, we have to add that he has not lost touch clearly with the United States, with Chicago, with his friends, with his brothers, certainly. You can see that from the fact that there's a great video of him, a recording of him giving this parish talk in 2024 as a cardinal to some of the parishes in the area where he grew up. So he still had those ties. And of course, now it's a matter of almost legend in sports and church that he is a long time, lifelong White Sox fan.
That's kind of cool. That's kind of
Yeah,
cool.
it really
No,
is.
it's cool, but it's interesting that you said about the American because, yeah, a lot of people were thinking there's no way the conclave is going to elect, an American pope. There's no way,
Right.
and like kind of like a Trumpian. Can you imagine? Which I don't know if it would have been a bad thing, but like this kind of Trumpian, strong, really super activist type of pope.
Right.
Yeah, that's but anyway, yeah, definitely his temperament is not the typical, the stereotypical American for sure. And very Augustinian, and I like what is pervasive throughout your book is this Augustinian principle. If you can talk about that a little bit, is unity in Christ, which is really his focus, his the point he wants to stress for the church.
Yeah, I don't think that we can overstate the importance to Robert Prevost, now Pope Leo the 14th, of Augustine and the Augustinian tradition. He said on the day that he was elected, I am a son of Augustine. Now, that's a great phrase. Some people would say, well, that's nice. He's an Augustinian. No, I think that has far more significance than some people even thought at the time of his election. We go back to Pope Francis, who was so deeply influenced by the Jesuits, by the Society of Jesus, by Ignatian spirituality. You can see that the way that it tied into things. Even more than that, I think you can say that Augustine has shaped and continues to influence Pope Leo the 14th. And it isn't simply that he quotes Augustine quite a bit. In fact, I would guess that almost all of his major homilies or addresses, he has some beautiful aspect of Augustine. But it's also, I think, the key to understanding his approach to this pontificate. The night of his election, the day of his election, he talked about he wished everyone peace be with you, the peace of Christ. But he then was very clear about the peace of the risen Christ. But it's that having that encounter with the truth that became such a hallmark of Augustine. It was his life's great pursuit, the pursuit of the truth. And when he found it, that great phrase, late have I loved you, that understanding that once you have found the truth, it means that you love God completely, but you can't stop there. That means that the love of God impels you toward love of neighbor. And that's one of the reasons why in the great Augustinian tradition you have what? That this great missionary, the missionary endeavor, this zeal for the missions, but then also as great mendicants, they're also out preaching. But then there's a sense of community, there's a sense of joy, but there's a sense of communion and unity. And it's why I think Pope Leo has stressed repeatedly in the month and a half now since his election the importance of communion and unity in the life of the church, but it has to be anchored in something.
Right.
And that something is Christ.
Right, and really the divinity of Christ, which you mentioned
Mhm.
here, that's really without truth there is no true unity, especially
Right.
Christian. So that's really important. And also taking the name of Leo the 14th, which you mentioned at the end, because now we're in a new revolution, kind of what they call the fourth industrial revolution, digital revolution. And
Yeah.
having the Pope as a mathematician is kind of cool too. He
Yeah.
might want to have close theologians who are also kind of maybe tech savvy in a sense, because I
Right.
think he's trying to tackle the principles of defending Catholic doctrine, uh,
Mhm.
providing principles to kind of counteract the whole, not that AI is bad in itself, but kind of we need guidance. Like, how do we use this? How do we regulate this? Where it just technology is at an exponential growth, and the magisterium just can't keep up unless you have again like technicians who are theologians too. And I don't know. I think Pope Leo the 14th is going in this direction. to kind of write and kind of counteract, or at least, give us light for this new industrial revolution. That's the reason he took Leo the 13th. But what say you?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think he is anchoring his approach to this in classic Catholic social teaching. It's why he took the name Leo the 13th, the great industrial revolution that sparked the drafting of Rerum Novarum, but then also this sort of crafting of Catholic social teaching. Now we have to take that wisdom and apply it to our lived circumstances, which, as you said, this great technological revolution, the AI revolution. But the thing that I find really interesting with Leo the 14th is that he's always going back to the essence of things. And
Yes.
he talks about the impact of these technologies of AI on the dignity of the human person, which, of course, is the heart and soul of Catholic social teaching. In exactly the same way that Leo the 13th, with Rerum Novarum, was so deeply taken up with the impact of the Industrial Revolution on culture, on families, but on the individual person. Yeah, you can talk about labor and capital and all of those important aspects,
Right.
but it still came down to the dignity of the worker, of the dignity of the human person. I think that's something that Leo is very concerned about. So I think we can assume anyway that perhaps his first major encyclical will be something on AI. Now, he's not starting from scratch. Pope Francis, to his great credit, was way ahead of the curve in trying to raise international awareness of this. There was a great document that came out just last year, Antica et Nova, that was looking at the question of artificial intelligence and its ramifications for culture. Leo, though, I think now wants to take that and reframe it or recast it with very clear direction and guidelines, and from the great tradition, the teaching tradition of Catholic social teaching, but then also see how that applies to the question of unity of the human person and how it brings us back to Christ. The other quick thing that I love about Leo the 14th's approach to all of this is he's not afraid of these technological revolutions and changes.
That's
He
right.
sees them as an immense opportunity, but he sees them. He certainly talks about the risks that attenuate it, that attend it, but he's not afraid of it. And I think he sees this. He came back, he does come back to the word formation. That the people who use it, which is you and I and everyone else who has an iPhone, for example, that we have to be formed. We have to be prepared to use it. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of what you mentioned before, the Gen Zers coming back to the church, a lot of them, if not most, came through because of, those good outlets, or if you will, or those channels
Mhm.
those Catholic channels that are in social media and things like that. So, I mean, there is a lot
Yeah,
of garbage, but there's also a lot of good. We
there
got to
really
be
is.
disciplined. So your last chapter ends with a new Leonine age. And if you could explain that, because actually that was a First Things article, which I think you mentioned also. Um, yeah. So basically, what does that mean? What does it hold? What do you think the future holds? That's a big
Yeah.
question, right?
Well, I think it wasn't an accident that he took the name Leo. You and I have talked several times about it now in our conversation tonight. I think there is the great tradition of Leo the 13th of confronting the realities, the challenges of modernity, which has been one of the great challenges, but also great tasks and the great moments in the life of the church, really since the time of Galileo, that the great revolutions in technology from the Enlightenment forward. And we continue to help the world, if only the world would listen, to bring to bear the wisdom of the teachings of the church. Leo the 13th was this great figure then in that. And I think Leo the 14th sees himself in that tradition. There's also the call to Leo the First, the Great. And Leo the 14th has actually mentioned him, who in 452, as we all know, saved Rome from destruction by Attila the Hun, the scourge of God, who is poised to destroy Rome. We don't know what Leo the First said to him that convinced him to leave Italy. So there's great courage there. But then there was also the great clarity that Leo the First brought in the great Christological heresy in the fifth century that received such great boost that the clarification and proclamation of our authentic understanding of Christ at the Council of Chalcedon in 451 So Leo stands as this Leo the First as this heroic figure, but also a figure of great clarity. And I think that's a role model that Leo the 14th has set for himself as well. And you've used the phrase that he is very clear in his teachings. And I think part of this Leonine legacy that we're going to be seeing now, this kind of Leonine revolution in the church, pertains to this clarity. It pertains to the need for courage in the face of these titanic changes, and also the great courage and clarity in how we deal with these technological revolutions that are before us. It is also my hope and my expectation that we will see, in much the same way that Leo the 13th raised up the legacy of St. Thomas Aquinas and cast it anew for the church in a sort of neo-Thomism, this new appreciation of Thomas Aquinas, that Leo the 14th is going to do something very similar for Augustine. But those two aspects, this Augustinian tradition, this Leonine tradition coming together, but in what? The unity in Christ, the unity in the church that only Christ can give us.
Yeah, you have his own Eterni Patris encyclical. Maybe Eterni
I,
Patris.
I hope he writes it because I'd love to read it.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Like the restoration of Christian philosophy, but
Yep.
with the spirit of Saint Augustine. Yeah, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's well said. That's awesome. So yeah, so guys, get this book. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Pope Leo
I
14th.
love you have a copy.
Oh yeah, I read it. So I
I,
read
I can see
not
that.
all of it, a good part of it. So I even
Yep.
mark it. Well, it's more of a biography. The other works I mark more. I don't like to mark biographies so much because so other
Right.
people can read it too. But
Right.
yeah, I did read a good part. I was actually trying to finish it up till 2:30 at night because I wanted to finish it up for the interview, and I almost got near my goal. So.
Yeah. Well, it's a good
uh,
sign it didn't put you to sleep.
no, no, it didn't put me to sleep. So so it's very good. And yeah, guys, get the book. It's excellent. And I'll give you the last word if you want to say anything for the viewers, any words of exhortation or anything, Matthew.
Yeah. That's the moment that he came out on the loggia. We knew, we said a fond farewell to Pope Francis. We had the days of mourning, the 9 days. But isn't it truly remarkable that you put 133 cardinals into the Sistine Chapel and they produced a Leo the 14th?
That's right.
And I think he is the Pope that we need at this moment. And I look forward to what he's going to accomplish over these next months and, as they say, ad multos annos, in the many years to come. But obviously, he needs all of us to be as holy as possible, to pray and to pray for him.
That's right. Amen. Amen. And yeah, definitely exciting times. All
Yeah.
right. Well, Matthew, thank you very much for coming on. Maybe next time we'll have you on for your future work or if there's
Yep.
another book.
I'd love to come back anytime. It was a
Yeah.
great conversation.
Very good. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. God bless. Thank you all for watching. All right.